We are Tailgate Talk, or I guess I should say I am Tailgate Talk. Welcome into the show. I'm Matt Thomas, flying solo today. If you've watched the show for any length of time, you've probably heard us mention that the other three on here, Trent, Coco, and Winnie, are all accountants. So obviously we're getting into the busy time of year for that profession. So they're off doing accounting things, working 6 days a week, starting new jobs, studying for the CPA exam. But I'm going to be here and be a degenerate and talk about Penn State football. So I think I'm the real winner, especially because I don't have to listen to any of them rag me about not going to the Rose Bowl. So I think it's going to be a good episode. So we'll see how this goes with my monotonous voice droning on. But if you've watched this long on YouTube, you've probably already gotten the algorithm to give us the view. So I think we're still the winner here. So it's been a lot that's happened in Penn State football since we had our last episode after the Rose Bowl. Not going to go into a crazy amount of detail on any one particular topic area. Going to try to keep this episode pretty short, kind of just talk about things high level and talk about things at a 30,000 foot view. Because I think when you look at it that way, a lot of the stuff that has happened over the last 3 or 4 weeks makes sense. But before we do that, just want to say on behalf of all of us at Tailgate Talk, thank you. Our last episode was the best that we've done. We had about, hit over the 1,000 view mark on YouTube within a day or two of posting, which I know doesn't seem like a lot when you have the Josh Pates of the world getting 1,000 in 5 minutes of live stream. But we started this podcast just because we were bored and never thought we'd have more than a couple hundred people watch any of our episodes. So to do something like that was a little bit of a milestone for us. Hopefully we'll keep it going. Reach out to us. I probably don't do a good enough job on the regular shows mentioning this. I don't mention it till the end when I remember, but reach out to us on our socials, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you look. It's PSU Tailgate Talk. Our email address is psutailgatetalk@gmail.com. Reach out to the show, ask us questions, drop a 5-star review wherever you listen with some questions. If I'm going to be doing more solo episodes in the off season, we can start a mailbag or try to do something to keep the show interactive and really get the sense of community going. Because honestly, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to connect each other. We started this podcast because we're all friends that didn't have the chance to be together in person as much anymore. And talking about Penn State football this way has helped us stay in touch. So let's see what we can do into the offseason going forward. And hopefully we're going to have some big things on the way. So speaking of big things, there have been some major developments in Penn State football over the last couple of weeks. I'm recording on Saturday, the 28th. So it's been almost 2 weeks to the day since Penn State has relieved wide receivers coach Taylor Stubblefield of his duties. And it hasn't been a full week. I think it's been about 5 or 6 days since they announced the hire of Marcus Hagans from wide receivers coach from the University of Virginia to fill that role. To be completely honest with you, my thoughts on that hire are a little mixed. Depending on the day, I kind of go back and forth. And that's probably not fair because it's a solid hire. Don't get me wrong. Like, there is nothing about the hire that I necessarily think is bad. I was just thinking, or maybe I guess you could say hoping, that given what we saw last year on the field, kind of exceeding expectations for what the 2022 season was going to be, going 10-2, winning the Rose Bowl, and knowing the pieces that we have coming back, especially on the offensive side of the football, getting a 5-star quarterback, presumably starting, all those things, and wide receiver really being that one position group where you look at on the offense as being the area that's the weak link. I was hoping that we would see a hire that kind of made a statement, a name that was kind of like, we're here and we're ready to take that next step as a program. Kind of in a way, not to the exact same extent that the Manny Diaz hire was last year. And that probably wasn't fair to expect. And the more that I think about the Marcus Hagans hire, I think it's more of a 100% culture fit. So just briefly background, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably already know, but just for FYI, if you don't, Marcus Hagans, wide receivers coach at the University of Virginia, spent nearly 2 decades at UVA as a player, as a coach, with a 4-year letterman as a quarterback. What is he, 7th all time on Virginia's total offense career stats list. Spent half a decade in the NFL, comes back to UVA in 2011 as a grad assistant, and then becomes the wide receivers coach in 2013 and has been there This is his third different staff at UVA, so that kind of speaks to how highly he's regarded down there. And if you follow anyone that's associated with the University of Virginia, they were sad to see him go. And even after the offense in 2021 for Virginia did not perform, I think, the way anyone he hoped. It says a lot about what they think of him. I mean, he's an absolute legend down there in Virginia, the same way that Anthony Poindexter is. So the ability to pull him away from his home, where he spent 2 decades as a player, as a coach, I think says a lot. And I think the reason why I was able to do it is because it's a culture fit. James Franklin talked about that when he made the hire. He literally said, Marcus is a relationship-based leader whose family values align with the culture of Penn State football. It's there, right there for you in black and white. So you're getting that piece together, and you're taking a bet on him to prove his skill and prove his worth, as opposed to the other way around, where you get someone who's talented, proven, has put guys in the NFL, and you're hoping that he's a good culture fit, which honestly, for where Penn State is right now, it probably makes sense. So he has to prove it in two different ways. Probably the area where he can have the biggest immediate impact, I think, would be recruiting. Virginia is obviously a very important part of Penn State's recruiting base. Obviously, we're not a national program recruiting, pulling any guy that we want from across the country. So we have to kind of recruit in the 5 to 6 hour range. And Virginia falls right into that, especially the Tidewater area of Virginia, where Marcus is from, the Hampton area, the Norfolk area. A lot of talent that comes out of that area historically. Even looking, I think I read that Hagen's children, their godfather is Allen Iverson. So that just kind of tells you the talent that comes from that area. And it's an area that, if Penn State can make some inroads, you can probably get some very talented receivers and other guys, because as he's the offensive recruiting coordinator, to come up to Happy Valley. At Virginia, he was able to get guys interested in that program that probably otherwise wouldn't have been, other than him, because of the relations he builds. Even after they choose to go to other schools, they stay in touch with him as a person. So I think he has that part of it already down. Now you have to say, all right, now you have the Penn State logo on your chest. You have the recruiting budget. Now you have to go prove it and finish with these guys. So we'll see how that develops. That's easier said than done. But I think that's one instant impact area that we can see from him. And then obviously there's the technical side of the job. 10 of the 15 receivers on UVA's all-time career receptions list were coached by Hagens. They were the only school in 2021 with 5 different receivers with at least 500 yards. Had even this last year, when the offense didn't really perform to the level of expectations, still had a receiver on third team all ACC. So it's kind of tricky to gauge, because after all, it is Virginia, and not to kind of shoot down anything that they've done. They were in the Orange Bowl a few years ago, but they are, not a perennial program. They have academic requirements even stricter than Penn State. So they have those things working against them. So I think you've been able to see him do more with less in his time at Virginia. And the hope is that now you come to Penn State, you have a little bit more tools at your disposal, and let's see what you can do. So this year certainly is going to test it, because he's got his work cut out for him. But in 2022, the receivers certainly didn't live up to the expectation that I think anybody hoped that they would. And honestly, again, that's not necessarily fair, because it's hard to replace someone like Jahan Dotson with over 1,100 yards, 12 touchdowns in 2021. Everyone expected Parker Washington to just step into that role, which he did. And he was, a serviceable wide receiver one, but it wasn't to that same extent. 600 yards, only 2 touchdowns. Granted, he was hurt for, the last month of the season and then opts out of the bowl game, but it just didn't go, I think, the direction that everybody hoped that it would. And I think there are a couple of reasons behind that, as I've been looking into it more and thinking about it more since the season's ended. There was just less opportunity. In 2021, obviously, there was no running game. So the receivers really in the passing game really had to lead whatever offense we had. That wasn't the case in 2022. They receivers in 2021 under Stubblefield had 300 targets. In last year they had 250. So you're reducing the amount of opportunity that's there. So then as a result the stats go down. So I wrote a little bit of this in my write-up on Basic Blues Nation. For those of you that are new to the show, in addition to doing this podcast, I do a little writing on that website as well. So if you want to go look at it in detail, it's there. But in 2021, 200 receptions, down to 160 last year. Receiving yards declined by over 600, touchdowns dropped by 7. So that's right off the bat a result of less opportunity. But then also when the opportunity did come, receivers didn't make the most of it. So I kind of looked at the stats and crunched the numbers. Basically in 2021, it equated to receivers dropping the football once in every 30 passes. So there were 10 drops on the year, or what can qualify as a drop. And it came out to 1 every 30 passes. In 2022, that were 16 drop passes, which doesn't seem like a drastic jump. But when you take into account the fact that there was less opportunity, it goes to 1 every 15 passes. So that's a major decline. And I think that's part of the reason why you saw the passing game struggle, especially down the field deep. The consistency just wasn't there. And obviously it's a lot of factors. It's, getting open, having time to get open, having a quarterback that can put the ball where it needs to be, and then finishing the play. There's a lot of things that go into it, but, overall the pieces just didn't come together last year. And unfortunately that kind of fell at Taylor Stubblefield's feet. And now it's going to be up to Marcus Hagans to fix it, and we'll see if that's actually going to come to fruition. But the talent is certainly there, and that kind of transitions into the other developments that we've seen as all this has gone down. Penn State picks up 2 receivers in the transfer portal. So you pick up Dante Cephas from Kent State, which honestly was probably the front runner that everyone expected to get in the transfer portal. With his ties to the Pittsburgh area, seemed like a good fit. Had 1,200 yards at Kent State in 2021, almost 800 this year. And then you have Malik McLean, who was a former 4-star, went to Florida State, didn't really pan out the way anyone he hoped, kind of fell down the depth chart, only had quick math, less than 500 yards in 2 seasons there. And now he comes in. So add that to the young talent that's already there. And there's a lot of potential in the room. I don't think anybody doubts that there's a lot of potential in the receivers room. It's just about getting consistency, getting someone that you can throw the ball up deep and they're going to come down with it the way that Jahan Dotson did. There are candidates for that. I think Cephas has to, catapult himself right to the top of that list. Now it's going to hurt that he's not on campus this spring, has to finish out his academic career at Kent State and then transfer in. But the talent is certainly there. Malik McLean, probably not this year. Everything that I've read or heard seems like it's more of a long-term investment from him, which is a good thing. That's something that we certainly need. But within the room, you have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who Rose Bowl performance indicates that he's ready to try to take up that mantle. But with him, it's just consistency. It's getting open consistently. It's catching the ball consistently. It's doing all the little things, game in, game out, drive in, drive out, that you need to do to be a top receiver in the Big Ten and nationally. You have younger guys, Caden Saunders, Amari Evans, Malik Mega, all these guys that the talent's there. We've seen it flash. And it's honestly a little frustrating because you can see what's there if it comes together, and it's just about getting it to come together at this point. So maybe a change in that room will be the thing that they need and spark that room to really take a step forward in 2023, because again, you're looking at what could be. And really, it seems like the one area that is the weak link on that offense is the receiver room. You have the running backs, you have the quarterback potential, you have probably the deepest and most talented offensive line that Penn State's had, not even just under James Franklin, but in a really long time. So you just got to be able to make the most of that and try to put together something special in 2023. So, okay, to kind of transition out of the news that has happened over the last couple of weeks, I wanted to take a step back and talk a little bit big picture about where Penn State is now and what the next couple of months and even a couple of years could potentially look like. So, again, do a little writing for Basic Blues Nation. And I did a piece, God, it must have been nearly a week ago now, about culture in college football and what kind of culture that Penn State has. And it seems like, it's one of those things that you learn when you do this kind of stuff now, which you don't always, well, I guess you kind of do realize it when you see comments on social media and stuff, but just taking things at the surface level and not going any deeper is challenging to get your point across and challenging to do an assessment of where a program is. I think honestly, looking at what's happened over the last 10 to 12 months, uh, Penn State is putting together a championship culture. James Franklin's putting together a championship culture. Now, that doesn't mean we're there by any step of the imagination. We're not. But I think just laying the groundwork of what has happened and what could potentially come, I think you have to acknowledge that it's there. And that looks different for every program. Alabama is not the same as Georgia or the same as Clemson. Some of those happen faster. Georgia put together, Kirby Smart was hired a year after James Franklin, and they've already been in 3 national championships, won 2. It happens faster in some places. It didn't happen as fast at Clemson as it did at Georgia or Alabama, or even potentially here at Penn State. But there are certain things that all these places have in common, that I don't think you can deny the way the last season turned out, that it's happening. And I think that's why you saw some of the decisions over the last couple of weeks that you've seen. I know the performance in the portal has kind of been maligned at sometimes over the last few weeks. Obviously, it ended on a good note, getting 2 receivers. But you didn't necessarily get the top talent guys on the list. But again, you get guys that are fits. You get someone from Penn Hills that's right in your backyard. Defensive tackle was another issue area that even really going into the spring portal season, that's something that Penn State has to look to address. But they're not just going to take someone just to take someone, and I think that's part of the problem that you expect. Oh well, there's a talented guy in the portal. We need to try to get him in. Well, it has to be about fit too. You have to, it's the same thing with recruiting. You're not just going to go star grab all the time, because they're not necessarily going to be someone who's going to gel with your program. And Franklin has talked a lot about that you're looking for someone who's going to be a good fit both ways and who's going to buy into what the program wants to be. And I think we're getting there. We're seeing that. You know, we've had elements of this type of culture before, 2016, 2017, but I don't think we've really been able to push through, obviously, the way we could now. And it's all about taking advantage of it. 2020, 2021 were not good years. Honestly, I would say that the culture around those years was subpar. And I'm not trying to point the finger at anyone. I think everyone in the world, just with everything going on, you could say that it wasn't, any of our best years, mentally or whatever it may be. But I think the way the program's responded from that now moving forward has made us better and has put us in a better position to succeed. So, just kind of looking at it from top to bottom, it starts with Pat Kraft. I think it's funny because last night was the big wrestling duel against Iowa, and we put on our Tailgate Talk Twitter about Pat Kraft in the background, just going absolutely crazy right up on the mat. Like, he is just like every one of us that's just a crazy fan. And the level of commitment that he has to bringing championships back to Penn State in all sports, I think speaks volumes. And it's not just about the performance on the field. It's about all those little things. I think we've talked about this before, I think even in our first episode, that it's all the little things that goes into building an organization. And that's what these programs are. They're organizations. So you have the investment in the Losh building in the last year. You have updates to Beaver Stadium coming. Franklin has talked a lot about how with the new leadership at Penn State, Neely Bendapudi, Pat Kraft, he's had more time to spend focusing on football. And at least personally for myself, I've seen better coaching decisions on the field this year. Now, that doesn't go in every instance. I think the Michigan game speaks for itself that we were wildly outcoached and outfoxed in that situation. But I remember pretty much every year since Franklin's been there, there's been decisions where they might be small, but it's you're just scratching your head like, why are you doing that? And then this year, I didn't really have any of those. And not, correlation doesn't mean causation by any stretch of the imagination. But the more that, I saw how the season came together this year and thinking about those comments, I just can't help but wonder if maybe, some things outside of the program were a little bit more connected to what we saw on Saturdays than you would normally want to believe. Another, aspect of that is the transfer of Malik McLean. He gets added to the roster after the ad drop deadline for Penn State spring 2023 semester passes. That's not a big deal at a lot of programs, but for Penn State, that's something that Penn State hasn't done in the past. But, the way that they're able to do it now speaks to a commitment to, trying to do the best for this program to succeed. And because of that commitment at the top, we've seen it kind of trickle down this year. I mentioned about coming back from the adversity of 2020 and 2021. You have that, but then at a smaller level, you have the 2 losses this year. How many times have we seen a Penn State team lose a tough game to a team that honestly is better than them, like Ohio State and even Michigan were this year, and then it just crumbles and you lose a game that you shouldn't? That didn't happen this year. We lose 2 games in 3 weeks in October, and then we go out the rest of the year in 5 games and outscore opponents 200-61. And yeah, the competition may not have been the best, but again, that's a game that Penn State loses somewhere down the line to Maryland at home or to Indiana on the road. And it just didn't happen. And then you get the win against the top 10 team in Utah, who's no opponent to slouch at, to cap it off. You just have to come out of it feeling really, really good. Playing unselfish football. I looked at some of the numbers, and Nick Singleton or Katron Allen could be starters pretty much anywhere in the country. We've talked about that, but when you look at the numbers, it's true. If they got the same run as anybody else in the Big Ten Conference, they would both be top 5 runners. Nick Singleton was with the limited snaps that he had. Let me just for reference, because the numbers were startling. On average, Singleton and Allen had 70 less carries than all the other top 10 runners in the Big Ten last year, and they were still up there. Singleton was 5th in rushing, Allen was 11th. So, if you don't have a culture that and a vision for the program that teaches those players that you buy in, you sacrifice a little to gain a lot in the long run, one or both of those kids are in the portal because they could just now, the day of NIL, to get their bag and go somewhere and then go off to the NFL. But the fact that they're here and they're committed, I think, speaks a lot. And that's what you see at other programs. You see, I always go back to what Alabama was this year. And Alabama did not have the season that they expected to have by any stretch of the imagination. And their season was pretty much over when they didn't make it to the playoff. But instead of basically, throwing in the towel and say, all right, well, I'm going to pack in and get ready for the draft, you have Will Anderson and you have Bryce Young, 2 potential top 10 picks playing in that Sugar Bowl game. And they do that because of the culture that has been around Alabama. Now, yeah, maybe that culture didn't get them to, win another national championship this year, but it's still there underneath. And I think that's the direction that Penn State's going. And we've seen that even a little bit on our own with the amount of guys that have come back, since the Rose Bowl has ended. Obviously you have Joey Porter Jr., you have Parker Washington, you have Brenton Strange, guys that leave for the NFL, but honestly, it was expected. I think at the beginning of the year, if you had to pick 3 guys that were going to go to the NFL, those 3 probably would have been the top on most people's lists. You have Nick Tarburton, who honestly is one that surprised me a little bit, but then when you take a step back and realize he's been on campus for a while, it kind of makes sense. But the amount of other players that could have gone to the NFL this year, been a early mid-round pick, somewhere in that round 3, 4, 5 range, but decide to come back, it just speaks volumes. That's something that you didn't see happen last year. Not just guys opting out or declaring for the NFL draft, but opting out of the bowl game. That really stung in a lot of ways. But now you have guys coming back, and you have guys saying that there's still more to accomplish. And I think that's a product of your culture. And again, that just because those underlying factors are there doesn't mean that Penn State or James Franklin or have that culture by any stretch of the imagination. There are still things that have to be proven, but I think we're in a position to do that now, which kind of brings into one of the last topics that I wanted to hit on, and that's the expectations that are going into this season. So I've seen, obviously, now putting this stuff out, putting my own writing out, you see a lot of comments and feedback from people in the fan base, which is helpful. But I've been surprised with, it feels like for every person that I see that is excited about what could be in 2023, I feel like there are two more people that almost, to me, they come across as angry that we're even talking about expectations. Like, I can't tell you how many comments that I've seen when you even just mentioned Drew Alar, that we shouldn't even be talking about the potential that he has, or the fact that he's 10th on the Heisman betting odds now, which literally doesn't mean anything. Like, those odds are literally the dumbest things ever, but we shouldn't even talk about it because he's just so young and we don't want to jinx anything, or he needs to develop. Like, the expectations are the expectations. Everybody knows what they are within the building. Uh, if you're going to build a championship culture, you have to find a way to understand what those expectations are and not get complacent and still win. That's what Georgia did this year. They win a national championship and they come back just as hungry as they were last year, and they have, in a lot of ways, a better season because of it. Honestly, looking at what's happened the last few weeks, I don't know if Taylor Stubblefield is fired if the program doesn't understand what the expectations are and understand what needs to happen in order to take that next step. So to me, I mean, again, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and opinions are valid. Like, they certainly are. But I think as people that care about this program, we're almost doing a bit of a disservice if we don't talk about the expectations that the program has and do it in a responsible manner, because you're going to have people that just throw out these wild things and all Drew Alar is going to win the Heisman or whatever. But those of us that understand the program better because we live it, like, we have to be able to juxtapose what could be with what we've experienced. And I think, honestly, like, looking at the entire national landscape of college football, this is probably the best chance, at least to me, that Penn State's had to make the playoff debate. A lot of people have been talking about how it's a similar vibe to 2017. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's a similar vibe to early on in 2020. Just in 2017, the group of talent, I think, was more concentrated in certain positions, where now it's more spread. And the talent in 2017 was much older, whereas now, same way in 2019, where you had these young players, a young core. I think that's what you see now. And obviously 2020 fell apart for a multitude of reasons. But I just look at the young talent that we have now, pretty much spread across the field. You have running back, quarterback, linebacker, safeties, offensive line. And I just think we are primed to take that next step. And just because the potential is there to take that next step doesn't mean that it's going to happen. Odds are it's not going to happen, unless you're, Georgia or Alabama or even really Clemson. And Clemson, you can argue whether or not they're still on that list. But unless you're one of those three schools, I guess you could throw Ohio State in there too, you're more likely to not make the playoff than you are to make the playoff. And that's okay, because you have to keep fighting that fight, and you have to keep, pushing forward, and eventually you can crack that ceiling. So, the expectations are what they are. And if we're going to get past where we are now, we're going to have to do things that we haven't done. A lot of the feedback that you get when you mention any of these expectations are, James Franklin's record against top 10 teams. Well, yeah, unless you're Kirby Smart or Nick Saban, you're probably not going to have a great record against top 10 teams. But that doesn't mean you can't put the pieces together and do it. So, if we're going to go to somewhere that we've never been before, we have to do things that we never have done before, mainly beating Ohio State and Michigan, preferably in the same season. And again, none of this happens in a vacuum. You have other programs that are on the rise too. Florida State, I think, is the other team that's kind of just thrown out with us as potential dark horses for the playoff, which I don't know how you could be a dark horse if everyone's talking about you. But I don't think that it's wrong of us to be excited for what could come, while still understanding that just because we're excited or there's a lot of hype or there's a lot of potential, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say on that. I think you could go into it a lot deeper, but I'm, at the 30-minute mark already, and I said this was going to be a short episode. So, just to briefly touch on other things in Penn State world, men's basketball has kind of struggled a little bit over the last couple of weeks, lost 4 of their last 6. They lost to Rutgers by 20 points on Tuesday night. Been a little bit disappointing, just, obviously a very young team, but what could be this year. Everyone was very optimistic that they could make the tournament. They still can. It's right in front of them. They have 11 games left, 9 of which are against either quad 1 or quad 2 opponents in the NCAA net rankings. But it's easier said than done. This team is just, it's amazing to me how literally if 2 things don't come together, they're not going to win. If you can't defend down low, which they've struggled to do late, as of late, and you can't shoot threes, there's no chance, of Penn State basketball winning a game. I think I looked at some of the numbers over the last few weeks, and when Penn State wins, they're shooting from deep, like at a 42% clip or something like that. When they lose, it's down around 30. And then the splits between home and road games are pretty much identical to that. So it's literally just comes down to, can you make 3-pointers, and can you keep whoever you're playing against, keep their big men, down under 20 points, which probably not that likely, considering in the next 4 days we play Zach Edey and number 1 Purdue, but we'll see what happens. Again, I'm recording on Saturday the 28th. Tomorrow, Penn State takes on Michigan at home. A big game, a must-win game. It's one of the last 2 games that isn't against quad 1 or quad 2 opponent. So if Penn State doesn't win that game tomorrow, the chances to make the tournament are falling slim. So, but then on the other side, you have Penn State wrestling, who is just having again another phenomenal season. Had a top 10 win against Michigan last week, had a win against number 2 Iowa last night, which was a really fun match to watch, or duel to watch if you haven't done so. Iowa looked like they had Penn State on the ropes at the midway point, won some of the swing matches that they really had to if they had any shot, but then champions do what champions do. Penn State won 5 of the last 6 bouts, and came away with a pretty decisive win. So it's exciting times. The hockey team has been faltering a little bit with Big Ten play, but they're still ranked in the top 10. Maybe as we move into the offseason a little bit and there's a little bit less of Penn State football to talk about, we'll dive into some of these other sports a little bit more and talk about some of the other things that are going on up there, because it's exciting times. Like I said, Pat Kraft's committed to bringing championships to every program, not just football. So we'll see what happens. If you're still here, thank you for listening to my voice. I don't even think I'm going to want to listen back to this for 30 minutes. So thank you for going through it. Again, reach out, subscribe. We'll make this show as interactive and user-friendly as we can be. But until next time, we are Tailgate Talk, and we'll see you soon.